work. Changed the camera today, so hopefully this is going to work out. Just bear with me a sec. Change that light like that. There we go. Now I can see you a bit better, or the lighting's a bit better anyway. Has this gone live? Yes, it has. It has gone live. Wow, cool. We are suddenly on Wednesday. This is Wednesday morning at 7:30 a.m. British summertime. I do these live streams on Twitch before I actually start work. And we've been building out the PHP object-oriented framework that we're building. And we're building that because I'm doing a course for FreeCodeCamp. And that course will teach object-oriented programming. And before that happens, I need to build an application in order to use that application for teaching. So we're building an invoicing application. We've built the routes that allows one to click through links on the pages and all of that lovely stuff. And there's URL parameterization as well. So we can pass in an ID in the URL in the get query. And all is good in the hood. That gets passed back to the controller and then into the view. Right now, though, what we're focusing on is the model layer. The model layer is the layer that is probably going to be the biggest layer, where we, thin controllers, fat model, and all of that jazz. The model layer will have these entities that represent records in the database. The database that we're going to be using is MySQL, and we haven't set that up yet, but we're just building out the models. One thing I've totally forgotten to do this morning is start the Docker machine and the Docker containers. So just bear with me just a second. Let's just do a reverse search. I should have done this. Machine. Start. There we go. So we're just going to start up that machine. And yesterday what we did is we created this invoicing model, this entity, I should say, and we decided upon the parameters or the properties that the invoicing entity should have. We're going to do the same thing today, but we're going to do it for the actual line item in the invoice. So this line item will represent a single line in the invoice where you can put in a description, you can put in a price for that particular unit or that particular row. There could also be a unit price, right? So you could have, if it was, say, an invoice that I typically do, where you invoice people on an hourly or a daily rate, then you would have a unit price per hour or per day. So that would be your daily or hourly rate, and then you would have the number of units that make up that line item. So that's just gone through. I'm just gonna, let's put that back to what it was. So let's do an eval to evaluate that to the shell. And let's do a doc. I think these containers are down by default. So exited and exited, yeah. So I need to do an up, and we're not going to bother with a build. I don't think it will build it anyway because everything's stored in cache. But let's just run that. Excuse me. Docker ps-a. The first, yeah, there we go. That's up. Okay, so the first thing I do usually is I do a run. Let's do a, can't find the right keyboard shortcut of the what was I doing? Oh yes, the unit test. So let's do a run of unit, but let's not bother with the coverage at this particular second, just because I want to focus on the code. And hopefully, so this is running against the Docker container. Yep, all 50 tests have passed and we have 77 assertions. So that's where we're starting from. Okay, let's now write some code, shall we? So we're going to go into the type, and that's the invoice that we created. But we're going to do this like we've done before in a sort of a test-driven development manner. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create the invoice item test. And I think I'm not sure whether I should call it invoice item or just item or invoice row or what have you. It technically is a line item, invoice line item. So I could call it line item. I could call it invoice item. I think calling it invoice item keeps to the domain. So it is an item of an invoice. So it's an invoice item. Let's do that. So you'll have to forgive me on these kind of streams. I am thinking about the code as I'm doing it. Usually, of course, I come when I do the tutorials on YouTube, I already know what I'm doing. So that's all. It's all pre-planned. I've literally woken up like an hour ago. So so I've just made myself a cup of tea, and I've come here and I've gone, right, let's write some code. So we have invoice item. That is fine. We'll leave that as is. Let's just move that down, move this over here so you can actually see what I'm doing. Like we did before, we're going to do the default. So the default of what the invoice item looks like when we instantiate that. So we're just going to remove all of those things. Let's just remove all of these and let's just think about the invoice item for a minute. So we're going to do invoice item default. And I guess what I could do, I could add another group just for the invoice, but I think 3 is enough. So I'm just going to take a slurp of my tea, and then we're going to think about what makes up the invoice item from the entity's perspective. Good old tea. Right. So the invoice item, we need to instantiate that. So this is the failing test because we don't have that class to instantiate. So the invoice item, as I mentioned, it's going to have, so invoice item is going to have a, it's going to have a description. Like so. We're also going to have a unit price. We're also going to have a number of units. So we could just do units. So we have, I'm just thinking like with my typical invoices that I send, I'm just trying to remember what they look like. So you have, I obviously haven't sent enough. So we have a line with the description. You could have a reference for that line possibly, which we could put in, because sometimes what I do is when I do a quote, I refer back to the line in the invoice. So maybe that is worth putting in. Whoops! Come on, PHP Storm. Let me grab that. So this is get reference. What else? So we have description, unit price, and then the number of units. We could have, obviously, we need to have a total, right? Because the total is the calculation of the units times by the unit price. So we have the total. There could also be other things such as whether it's vatable or taxable. And all of that kind of good stuff. I think for now though, just to get something off the ground, this is a good start. So let's now think about what are the defaults of these things when we first instantiate the class. Bearing in mind that the invoice item is just going to be a container for this data. We're not going to worry in this stream yet about the calculations of these things. I was thinking about this last night. And the calculations, I think, are going to be, there's going to be like a class that hydrates all of this stuff from the database, and then we're going to run it through a calculation routine, which is external from the model, and that will manipulate the totals for both the invoice and the invoice items. And also, yesterday I was talking about the date stuff, so the creation dates and the updated dates, and also the IDs, because the IDs are going to be the primary keys from the database, and how to actually populate those from when we actually hydrate the thing. And I think what I'm going to do is take a leaf out of Doctrine's book. This I should say is by no means a replacement of Doctrine. This I should stress, and I think I should stress it in every stream, is not going to be production ready. This is just a test bench for me to use to teach object-oriented programming. But I think what I'm going to do is use the lifecycle callbacks that Doctrine have. I'm obviously not going to copy and paste, but I'll use that sort of mechanism. So these lifecycle callbacks will be the lifecycle of both, say, a pre-persist. So this manipulates the model before it gets persisted into the database, and then there is a post-persist, and there's some other bits and pieces. I think there's pre-updates and all of this jazz, and they will alter the date created, date updated, those kind of things, and also populate the IDs, I believe. But we're not even that. We're not even there yet. So, but that's where my head is going. So okay, so we have the invoice item. We've got all of these things that we're trying to get. Let's now decide what their data values are. So I'm just going to copy a line from here. Let's just copy that one for now. Come on. Because what I want to do is I want to ensure that I've got the right spelling of assert empty. So we have this assertion of empty invoice get description. So we want to make sure that that's empty. We also want to make sure that this is a string as well. So let's do assert is string. Okay, so that's the description done. The next one is the unit price. Now the unit price is going to be, well, so to make it easier, it would be an integer, but to be honest, it could be a float. So it could be a decimal place, perhaps. So let's copy that, put that in there. So the invoice, the unit price is going to be is float, and we're going to just make sure that the that the value of get unit price, so we do is, and we could do equals, although let me just double check a minute what I've done on here, because I've done floats, is same. Yeah, okay. So that's checking the data type as well. Just doesn't really mean that I need to do is float, to be honest, because that's redundant. But let's do is same, or assert same, I should say. And that's 0.0. That's the expected outcome. Okay, let's just make that a bit smaller so you can see it. So that's the unit price. The next one is the number of units that we're going to do. So this is going to be an integer, because you can't have half a unit in this case. You can't say, well, I did half of this. If that was the case, then what I would probably do is have a discount, or I would make the actual unit price smaller to adapt for that. It's nice and it's easier when you keep things nice and simple. So we're going to assert that this is an integer, and this is the unit price, or sorry, the units, get units, because you'll have 1 unit, you could have 10 units or whatever. And we're going to make sure that this is, come on, same, and we're going to set that to 0 to begin with. Now I think that I mean, same, just check the data type. So I don't think that the is ints and is floats and all that jazz is needed. But let's just keep it for safekeeping. So that's the units. We have the reference. The reference is actually going to be a string, so that's very similar to the description. So that is the reference. And the total is going to be a float, so we can copy the unit price here. Get total. Okay, let's run this and see this all fail flat on its face because we haven't actually created any of this yet. But let's run that and we can see, come on, hopefully if it works. Yeah, we have this invoice item isn't found. So what we're going to do is we're going to build that out and we're going to set all these as we've intended them to be. So let's go over to the old up here. Let's go up into the entity type. Invoice, we're going to copy that, paste that in here, invoice, and this is going to be item. Invoice item. We're going to keep the reference because we're using the reference. We don't need any of this. We're going to keep the total, I believe. Are we? I can't remember whether we use total. Let's just remove it. So we've got the reference to remove all of these things. We're going to keep the set reference and we're going to keep, nope, that's all good. We're going to get rid of all of that. This needs to be an invoice item. That's what we're returning. This is an invoice item as well. Okay, this is all good. All good. Okay, let's run this and see what has failed. We obviously haven't filled all of this out. So let's run that. Meow. Okay. So, oh, that's interesting. It still can't find invoice item. Why is that? This is because it's an invoice item type. Okay. Let's go to item. Invoice item. Sorry. There we go. Right. I didn't have the namespace correct. Let's run that again. Ugh. Come on. Get on the desk. Right. Okay. So we have here a call to undefined method, get description. Okay. So we can scroll all the way down here. Open this out. Go into the invoice item. Build the description. So it's the same really as the reference. Description. We're going to give it some getters. There you go. Run this again. What else is broken? Come on. It's a bit slow this morning. There we go. Next one is get unit price. So get unit price is a float. So let's do, let's just grab that, bung that in there. This is a float. This is unit price. And we're going to set this to be 0.0 to start with. And let's just bung another getter in. There we go. We should have get unit price. Run this again. And essentially this is like the way I'm going to sort of build out these models. It's kind of like a, we do the test, we then write the code, we run the test, and until the test is actually passing, we then move on to the next piece of code. So now we have get units. So get units, scroll down here. We do a private. If I can't spell private, that's why I copy things, because I'm dyslexic. Let's copy that, put that in there. Okay, units, this is going to be an integer. We're going to start that off as 0. Whoops. Let's put that in as an int. Scroll down here. make another getter. Boom, get units. Okay, run this again. Where are we at now? Okay, next one is the total. Total, I believe I had as a float. So we're going to copy the unit price. Total. That was a float, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Down here. Boom. Getters. Yes. Build me a getter. Okay, awesome. Let's run this again. Woo, 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 woo. Yes, and now everything is passed. This is awesome. Okay, so we now have built our default invoice item, which is great. So let's go and take a look at that test. That's looking pretty awesome. Now what we can do is actually build an invoice item. So let's test the creation of these things, or test the setting of these things to make sure that they are all wired up. So let's, first of all, I'm just going to copy that whole method. I'm going to bung it down here. Let's just bring this out, make a little bit of room. Come on, PHP Storm, allow me to grab that. Thank you. So we're going to set the description first. So we're going to do invoice item. We're going to just change this to be test description. Invoice item, and we're going to do invoice item set description. And we're going to set this as test invoice item. And what we want to do is ensure that we get that back. So we do assert same. Of get description, and let's just make that a little bit smaller. Can I? Come on, where's the... There we go. Just make that a little bit smaller so you can see it. So we are invoice item description. Set description. Okay, so that's setting the description. We don't need that anymore. So this is going to fail because you can see that this is grayed out because we don't actually have the set description method. So I'm going to run this. It's going to fail, but hopefully the others will pass. Which it does. So let's now go back to fill that out. So let's go to the up here, and then I'm going to press my Control N, Command N, add a setter, and the setter is a description. We want fluent setters, so that's good. Let's run that. And that's passed. I guess what other things I could test as I'm doing this is I could ensure that the return of these things are correct. So we could do invoice, we could do item here, and we could ensure that that we have fluent setters. So we could do something like let's just copy that, and we could insert, I think is there an instance of the expected is the invoice item, which actually is just invoice item : class, and then it is the item. Now from memory, I think that doesn't work. You need to actually do it from the actual class name itself, like so. Okay, so we're actually making sure that we have the setter is are actually returning the invoice item. So that means we can do like chain setters as well. Let me just run that test and make sure that that is the case. I think that is right. But whenever you're writing tests, you want to make sure that you're not only testing the stuff, the logic that actually happens within the method. And I know here we are only doing setters and getters, but you want to make sure that the return of those things is expected. So your entry points and your exit points. Okay, so that's that. We're going to copy the whole thing because we're going to do the reference now. And the reference is extremely similar. So this is test reference. We're going to do set reference, and I think, yeah, I did copy it through. Again, we're going to check that that is the same. Let's just change this to be, or add the word reference to the end of that, just to be slightly different from everything else. And obviously we're checking the reference here, not the description. So get reference. And then let's run this, and hopefully that has passed as well. Brilliant. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing we can do is we can test the units. So we want to set a unit, set units, and those units are going to be, say, 4. Maybe I've done 4 hours worth of work. And again, we're going to check the instance of that, and we're going to check that we have 4 coming back when we do get units. Okay, so that's failed because we don't have the method set units in our class here. So we can go into the invoice item, and then we can open that up, go into setters and knock units in, fluent setters again. Let's save and let's run this again. Hopefully that would have passed. Which it has. So the next thing I'm going to do is set unit price. Set unit price, and this is going to be, say, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. We want to check that it is actually a float. So let's do 200.53, just to, whatever. Why anyone would have 53 as an invoice. A unit price for an invoice item, I don't know. But anyway, let's check that. So this is get unit price. We're going to push this in. And this could just be any kind of make-believe number, so blah, whatever. As long as we're checking that the units are coming back correctly. Set unit price, and this one above here is set units. Awesome. Get unit price, all of this jazz. Run this. This should fail as expected. Go up into here in the invoice item. Let's just make sure that that has, set unit price isn't defined. So let's define that. Let's hit the setters. Let's go into unit price. Boom. And then let's, whoops, no, I don't want to move that. Let's run that again. Hopefully that has passed. Which it has. Okay, awesome. Next one, last one, is the total. I think this is the last one. The last one, I haven't copied that, have I? No, good. No. Come on, PHP Storm. I'm blaming PHP Storm, but really it's my fat fingers. Set total. Total. Okay, so the total, we're going to just do blah, 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 blah. Whatever that is. That's not a right total. I don't get paid in SDF. So let's just finger tap on the old keyboard. and this is get total, get total, set unit price, set total. Okay, and we're going to run that. That is going to fail as we've expected. Invoice item, boom, setters, total. So I don't think you can see what I'm doing when I'm actually running that on PHP Storm. It's Command N. Command N brings up a sort of a menu, pop-out menu, and it will generate things for you. So in this case, I've generated the set total. I should have mentioned that beforehand. I do apologize. Okay, that's been set so we can run all these things, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that is now done. Which it is. Wonderful. Woohoo! So that is the invoice item and the invoice that we've created yesterday. These have been tested. Okay, I'm going to drink some of my water this time. So that's awesome. One thing I do need to do is I obviously need to wire up the invoice item to the invoice. And we can see that in the invoice, this is the invoice entity here. We have a number of items. This is an array. So that would be an array of invoice item objects, or a collection, you would call it in the doctrine world, I suppose. And therefore there would be a method on the invoice here to set those. So we should have, I should have created yesterday, somewhere in here. This is all getters. Oh no, I didn't. Yesterday I did do any of the setters. I just did all the getters. Oh, I did the set reference, set total, set VAT. Oh yes, I remember. No, I was going to leave the actual building of the invoice items and the setting of those things once the invoice items had been created. The whole chicken and egg kind of thing. And also we have the customer. So the invoice actually has a fair amount of dependencies it requires. It requires a customer, it requires invoice items, and I think we also got it to require a status. Now I say requirements and I say dependencies in a very loose manner because you might not have a customer when you create the invoice. You might want to assign the invoice to a customer later on. Something that happened to me not so long ago is that I didn't actually have the customer details, all of the details, to fill out the invoice. I was doing the invoice and I thought, I don't actually have all the bits and pieces that I need. So I saved that as a draft. So that would be in a draft status. And then I got in touch with the customer, asked for the customer details, and then I filled out that customer, created a new customer record in the invoice application that I was using. It certainly wasn't this. It was something a little bit more professional. And then I assigned that customer to the invoice, and then I updated that status from draft to something else or what have you. So what I'm saying is that your invoice is going to be in a state before it is ready to actually get sent off. At first of all, the status could be set to draft or something, but we're going to continue focusing on with the invoice items. So we need to have a method in the invoice entity here to set the items. So once we've built the items, we need to set the items. And so forth. So that is what we're going to do in just a second. Now, before we move on to that, I just want to give a nice shout out to the sponsors of this live coding stream. We're sponsored by Hostinger. Hostinger is a web hosting company, or hosting platform. And at the moment, they have 82% off plus a free domain when you get their hosting. And if you use the discount code Peter Fisher, then you can also get a further 15% off, and you'll certainly help. You'll help a little bit with the channel, and that is much appreciated. So if you can go to hostinger.com/Peter Fisher, that would be really, really awesome if you're looking for buying a domain or if you're looking for web hosting. I use Hostinger. It's a good hosting platform. They have some really nice VPSs as well. Very robust, very reliable, which is always good, and extremely affordable as well compared to all the other cloud-based bits and pieces that float around these days. So very, very good. In fact, we're going to be using Hostinger to host a website that is going to hold all of these tutorials. These tutorials that I'm creating here are going to, or they're not tutorials, all of these streams, they're all mounting up to build this invoicing application that I'm going to be using to teach object-oriented programming for FreeCodeCamp. So that is a course that I'm creating for FreeCodeCamp. And these live streams are the demonstration, if you will, of building the application that I will be using for that. So we'll be talking, I mean, here, for example, we've got visibility scopes, privates. We have abstract bits and pieces. So if I go into there, we can see that that is a class abstract. We have protected here, which is that visibility scope. We've also built some static bits and pieces. I'll be talking about design patterns as well in that course. So I'm not necessarily talking about those things. I'm not teaching those things in this stream, but I need those things in place for me to then teach them. So this is what we're doing in this stream. Also, every Friday we have a podcast. So that's howtocodewell.fm. And I've been speaking to some fantastic, awesome, inspirational people in web development and programming. Not only developers, but also hiring managers, project managers, people who have built applications to help mentoring, leadership skills, soft skills. And we've been, and it's been a lovely experience of talking. I think I've got now 23 guests. Last night I spoke to Ines Van Essen, who is Twitter handle Mother of Code, and she's built this lovely platform called Donate WC, which is a mechanism, a platform to donate to help people go to WordPress WordCamps. So that will be coming soon in the next months, weeks or so. I've got to obviously edit this and process this and get it reviewed and accepted and so forth. And this Friday we have, we've got Jack Woodcock on, and he is a development manager at Amazon. So we're talking about what it's like working at Amazon. So this is super awesome. So yeah. Do check that out. That's howtocodewell.fm. And also go back through all the other previous guests. Last week we had Emma Vidkine on, and she was talking about all the things that you need to be aware of when you want to improve in development as a developer. And not only technical skills, but soft skills too, leadership skills, and communication skills and all of that good stuff. And that was an awesome interview. I had with her. So do check that out, howtocodewell.fm. And also thank you very much to Hostinger. That's hostinger.com/Peter Fisher if you want to get some awesome web hosting and a free domain, 82% off. That's an incredible price. And then a further 15% off if you use the discount code Peter Fisher. So yeah. Check that out. Let's now focus on creating the invoice or signing the invoice item to the actual invoice. So let's scroll down to the, here we go, the invoice test. That's the one I wanted to play with. So the first thing I need to do is I need to obviously create the invoice item, and then I need to assign it. So we're going to grab that. I think what I might actually do is create this as a third test, because what I like about these tests are that they're very kind of like distinct. This is testing an invoice. This is testing an invoice item. Now we're going to be testing the connection, the integration between the invoice item and the invoice. One could argue that this is actually an integration test because we're not actually testing a single unit of work. We have to instantiate multiple objects and then assign those objects to each other. But let's not cross at straws here. Let's just create another unit test, and we're going to call this invoice item to invoice. Or we could just call this add invoice item to invoice. Add invoice item to invoice. Yeah, that's a little bit more verbose, isn't it? So I don't think you saw that whole pop out there, but it's called add invoice item to invoice test. It's a bit weird using PHP Storm in a live stream because you don't know what is and what isn't on the stream until you see it. And obviously I'm trying to focus on the code. Okay, so okay. So let's do that. We've got our invoice, and we're going to, above here, we're going to create our invoice item. Invoice item. And we need to create the invoice item, and we need to add it or set it to the invoice. So the invoice, we're going to create a, let's do an add item. And we're going to set the invoice item like so. So really, we could just get away with just doing a blank invoice item to the invoice. That there is no requirement that there is anything filled out in the invoice item when it gets into the invoice at this stage, at least, because we've set those defaults. It's just going to, everything is going to be set to 0. So we could get away with just this, and this is actually a good thing because we are actually testing a unit of work here. We're testing that this is the correct connection. So we could do test add item. Okay, let's save that. We're going to run this. It's going to fail because the add item hasn't been added in. Oh gosh, I've had a cold for a very long time. It's very annoying and it's frustrating and it's getting really boring now. Right, call to undefined method invoice add item. Invoice add item doesn't work because it doesn't exist. Douche. So we're going to go public function. Actually, let's just copy that. Why am I making life difficult? Why don't we just copy code? So we could do add item here. The item is going to be called invoice item. Whoops. We're going to return the invoice, which is awesome. And we're going to add the invoice item to the array of items. So we would do something like this. Items, boom, and then invoice item. And we obviously need to change the comments. So that's that. This is this. So that is the bulk standard way of doing that. You could obviously use array push and so forth. Now, there is a question over, how complicated I make this, because we obviously don't want to be adding the same invoice item to the list, the array of items. So there could be a check in there to make sure that this invoice item object doesn't currently exist. Let's just run this though, because we've written some code and we haven't tested it. Let's run that and test that, and hopefully that will come true, which it is. So let's go back to the test. So we got this one here. We should also, I'm going to just grab that invoice item. We should also check the assertion that the instance of the return is the invoice, not the invoice item. Invoice. There we go. So let's just make sure that that is the case. Let's make sure that I have the setters running. That is good. So the next thing I'm going to do is do the set. So this is adding a single item. Next, we're going to actually set the items. So let's do, let's just change this to be invoice add item, and then Yeah, we don't need to worry about that. So let's grab that, go into here. So this is now set items. Set items. And just to recap, the reason why I do all of this stuff is because I can use, let's say, for example, I could do -G and I could pinpoint this particular test. This is why I do these things. Obviously, I've just literally copied that code, so it's going to work. But it's great to actually use these groupings, and you can have multiple groupings like we've got here. So if I wanted to test all the entities, so all of these things, then I would run that. If I wanted to test only the invoice add item tests, then I would run that, and it would run both of these tests. But if I wanted to run that single one, then we would put that as a group. So usually I have 2 or 3 groups. And it's really handy when you get a bug, say, for example, Jira, and it gives you a bug ID, then you could put a bug ID into here, and that way you can actually specifically pinpoint the test for that, so that should ensure that bug is fixed, or test that bug at least. Okay, so we're now going to set these. So we're going to run set items, and set items will require an array. So we're going to just bung that in. So that will fail. Just run that single test. But the reason why I was just running all of the tests is because unit tests are just, they're super quick. If your unit test is taking more than, say, half a second, then you've got an issue. You're testing too many things in a single unit. So set items doesn't work because it's not defined. And what I'm going to do in the set items method, so this is let's do that. Let's do setters and generate items like that. In the set items, we're going to have an array of items. And what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to reset this to a blank array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do for each, items as item, and we're going to call this add item, passing in the item. And I'll explain why in just a second. Let's just do that, hit this, run this. Okay. Well, the reason why I'm going to do this is because in add item, I want to have some logic to actually check whether or not the item already exists. But what we haven't done in our tests, of course, which is very naughty of me, is that if we go to this test here, we haven't actually ensured that these are actually being set. So, we're setting them, but then we're just checking that the class is returned correctly, which is silly. So what I need to do is I need to do this assert in, is it array or array contains? There's one of them. Array has hash key. There is, I'm sure there's a way of checking whether or not. Yeah, assert contains. Hopefully this is going to work. So what am I working on here? The set of items. Okay, so contains, and we're going to contain that. So the expected is this, and come on, PHP Storm. This would be invoice get items. Hopefully that will work. Let's just run this. I'm not actually running the right No, I am running the right test. Add items, set items. Yep. Okay, cool. That works. Also, we want to make sure that it only contains that, because we've said that when we set the items, we want to reset the items. We don't want to add these items to existing items, because that would get confusing. Calling the set items with a list of items would reset it back. So let's add that in as a test. So what we need to do is we need to create ourselves an invoice item. How would we do that? Yeah, we would do that by calling another invoice item in here. So let's say this is invoice item 1 and that's invoice item 2. We want to do set items of invoice item 2, and we want to do another set items here of invoice item 1. So the first time we're going to set this, it's going to reset the blank array because it's blank already, and it's going to have that. The next time we're going to run this, it's going to call set items again, and it's going to reset the items, and it's only going to put in item 2. So we do contains only that invoice item, and it's going to be invoice item 2 because we would have removed that. Hopefully this is going to pass. No, it doesn't pass. Argument 1 passed to contain must be a type of... Oh, that's annoying. It must be a string. Why are you a string? That is not what I wanted. I assumed contains only interface of. No. Assert attribute. No. I thought that you could just check. Huh. I tell you what I could do instead is I could do contains that, and I could do a count. That's what I could do. So it contains a count, and the count is 1. And we're counting that. Now, I'm going to run this. Has that worked? Count expected, countable, iterable, and got an int. What? Oh, okay. Maybe, yeah, of course it needs to be countable. Sorry, it needs to be an array. Of course it does. Hopefully this will pass. Hopefully this will pass. Yes. So this is actually doing a lot of things. This is doing a lot of responsibility here. Really what we need to do in the test suite is we need to have another one which just has reset. So we can do... So this is an example of how the test is saying that actually we need to refactor this code. So where we say test items, we're going to have test reset items, and we're going to have a reset call. So we have item blah 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 blah, and then we're going to reset that. So we can do on set items, we can do invoice reset items, and that will reset it. That will reset it back to the blank array, because what this is indicating is that this is actually doing too much work. So what we need to do, we don't need to do a set items. We don't need to do a contains. We could just simply do assert empty. We don't need to have the whole second one. This is invoice item 1. We can just change that to invoice item. And we're just making sure that that is now empty. So we've added it. Now we're making sure that it's empty after we've reset it. So let's go on to here. Let's go into the code, which is in here. So we need to create a public function called reset items. And reset items is going to do just this. Items is equal to that. And then we're going to return this. Let's put in some code here. Let's put that. There she is. Okay. So this, we're going to do this reset items. Okay, let's just remove all of these things, and also let's just make sure, I just want to double check that everything is as I expect it. So invoice, add items, so this is reset items. We can leave that as is, but and this will reset and go back to 1, so that's fine. But that indicated to me that we needed to separate that reset. So let's save that, run this. Because we might want to have a button that just, clear, reset, that kind of thing. That's where my head was at. So let's get another unit test in, because we're at 59. I want to get to 60. So let's take a look at the code. So we have a reset items, we have a set items, and we have the add items. Fine. We're not going to worry about the calculations of these things. I mean, what you could do is you could hook in a calculation when you go and add an item. You could make sure that that item gets recalculated, and even the total gets recalculated. But I want to move that responsibility, the responsibility of the calculation, into its own class. So I'm not going to worry about that today. What I do want to do, though, is ensure that we make sure that an item cannot be added twice. So, because I mentioned that we have the way of checking, having a way of checking whether or not the items already contain the invoice item that has been passed. So, what I want to do is in the add item invoice here, we want to create another test. Scroll. Come on, PHP Storm. Right, so we want to test contains items. Okay. Or test does contain item. Does contain item. So we have we're going to have 2 invoice items, but they're going to be cloned. So we have invoice item 1, and we're going to clone. Excuse me. We're going to clone that to invoice item 2 is equal to a clone. Whoopsie. Come on. Of invoice item 1. So both of these objects are the same. Excuse me. Okay, so now we have the invoice, and what we're doing is we're going to set the items, but what I would like to do first of all is add item. So we're going to add the first one, which is item 1. And then what we're going to do, well, in fact, we don't need to clone it, do we? We don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. We can just simply do, and I should stop using the word simply, because this never is. So invoice add item, we need to call upon invoice does items contain, let's be a little bit more verbose, does items contain, and then you pass in invoice item. We don't need to have the 1 anymore. So this is going to make sure that it does contain it. That's going to return a Boolean, or true or false. So we don't need to worry about this. This needs to, oh, actually we do want to remove that, but we want to change this to be assert true. And this is going to be invoice get items. So this is, we'll set that to a variable. So does items contain. So in our class now, we need to have some logic that iterates over the invoice items and checks that the item is already there. So let's run the units. This should fail. Go into the invoice itself. It does fail because that does item contain doesn't exist. So let's add that in. So public function, boom, no, does items contain, and we're asking for an invoice item. And what we're going to do, and this is going to return a Boolean. Let me just bring that out so you can see it a little bit better. So we're going to do a for each, and we're going to for each this. Did you see what I did there? That was a nice little nifty PHP Storm trick to actually populate the for each thing. So we're going to for each as item. We're going to change that to be invoice. Well, no, that will be item. We're going to change that to be object, because it is an object. And then we're going to do if item is object. So we're going to compare. Then we're going to return true. If not, we're going to return false. Now, there's probably a better way of doing this completely. Off the top of my head, though, I'm just bashing in code. But there is probably a better way of comparing the objects, probably outside of the for each as well. I could create this as an iterable. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. All right. Let's just run this and see what happens. This might just fail. Boom. It's passed. Now, why is that? Why did I create this does items contain? Well, what I want to do, because that's returning a true and a false, actually, before I even get to that point, I should check that it is returning false correctly. I'll talk about why I actually created that in just a second. So does item contain? We should have another test in here that checks for the other pass. So this is does items not contain? Does items not contain? Horrible English there. Does not contain. And the way we can do that is just by just dropping the add item call, because that should by default here is a blank array, and then that will be a false. Yeah. So run this code. 61. Now that's good. The reason why I did it, all of that in the first place, is when we get to the invoice, when we're adding an item, I want to make sure whether the item, when we hit add, doesn't contain it already. So what I want to do is I want to do if this does item contain, items contain, passing in the invoice item that we've got. So if that is false, so it doesn't contain it, then we add it, because I don't want to be adding the same invoice item. And that is kind of a roundabout way of checking that. So we make sure that if it doesn't contain, so if false, then we add it. So let's run this this whole shebang again. Hopefully all of these unit tests will pass. Which they do. And you may have been wondering at the start of this stream, you know, why on earth are you doing all of these unit tests on these things? Why are you just testing getters and setters? Why are you doing all of this stuff? You know, this is pointless. I've been there. That's where I thought when I started doing tests. But as you've noticed, I hope, as this has progressed, we're not just setting values, we're resetting items. We are calling add item. We're doing more than just, you know, setting a value to the property of the object. We're doing far more. You know, yes, okay, with the things like the set references, yes, that is just setting the reference. It's just setting a string and so forth. But in my experience, there's, you know, the smaller bugs are the ones that catch you out, the spelling mistakes, those kind of things. And also, you might want to be altering the mechanics, the internals of how these things work. So, for example, with the add item, we are making sure that the item doesn't contain the item that we were trying to add. And then in the set items, the set items is actually doing quite a lot of stuff. We're resetting the items, we're then iterating over the items, and we're adding the item. So really, to just finalize this, to make sure that this does the thing, we could write another test that loops over. Of course, that is going to reset that. But here's a test. Let's do add item to invoice. Scroll down here. This will be the last test because I do need to crack on. And if this doesn't work, then I'm going to have to pull it out. So so let's test set the same. And what we're going to do is we're going to just do this time. We don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry. We're going to do invoice item. And where's the set call? Where's the set call? Set items. Here we go. So we're going to set the items, but we're going to create, we're going to just pass in the item twice. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the count is 1 rather than 2. And that will be our proof of concept. Really what I should have done is set the same item. I should have done this first as a test-driven development kind of manner. So I want to I'm setting the same invoice item, but I want to make sure that there's only one in there. I don't want to be adding the same thing. So let's hit save. Let's run this test. Fingers crossed this works. If this does, I'm going to make myself a nice cup of tea, and then I'm going to crack on with the rest of my day, which it is. We've hit 62. Woo! Okay, so that's 62 unit tests. Which is all good. At some point, I will need to rerun the code coverage and just make sure if there's any holes that I need to fill. But this is going really well. We now have the ability to create a set of invoice items, and then assign those to the invoice. So what I'm thinking of doing tomorrow in tomorrow's stream is dealing with the some reference data. Reference data is the data that is structural to or integral to the system. So the reference data in this case is the, scroll right up to the top here, is status. So tomorrow I'll be working on the status. And I may even move into the customer, because I don't think the status is as difficult or as lengthy as the invoice and invoice items, because the status is just going to be a string, right? It's just going to be like draft or what have you. So that's going to be done, and then I'll move on to the customer. Once those two things are done, and we can then create a whole unit test to then or integration test to test the whole hanging together of these entities, then we can start focusing on actually writing SQL that will back this up. But in the meantime, if I don't speak to you before then, if you don't tweet me on how to code well and say hello. If I don't speak to you beforehand, have a good day. Happy coding, everyone. And I'll see you tomorrow, probably at 7:30 a.m. BST again. Thanks for watching. Happy coding. Bye-bye.